be turning your Bibles to Luke chapter 12 and a textual study tonight out of the book of Luke. Luke was a follower and apostle and disciple of Christ who was very close with Jesus as he walked around and taught around. Luke was a physician, and I think one of the things that we learn from that fact is the letters of Acts and Luke that he penned are written in a style that is very specific. He pays very close attention to detail and content. And if you think about how a physician is trained to really be aware and to make note of different things, I think that really stands out anytime you read certainly the book of Acts and the book of Luke. And in tonight's lesson, it's no different. Luke pens a time and makes record of a time when Jesus Christ was going around and had followers and was giving basically lessons. We're going to study about a parable tonight that he taught, the parable of the rich fool. And the context of this particular time is a time when multitudes were following Jesus Christ. And what I like to see and what I like to learn about the methods and the teaching methods in the mind of Christ was he took every opportunity that he could and seized upon that opportunity, many times taking questions from the crowds and using that as teaching methods. And I think that's something that we can do. I think it's something that we should tune ourselves to do and listen for in our daily lives. It certainly is not difficult to do that if we have the proper training and the proper heart and the proper prepared mind to do that. So let's look tonight at Luke chapter 12. Our main focus point is going to be 13 through 21. I certainly am going to look at some other verses too that build up the context. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "In the meantime, when," look at this, "an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to speak to his disciples." Think about that. Luke took the time to make mention for the future reader that there were too many people to count. Now, he's a doctor, okay? He likes to be specific and probably accurate. You know, we talk about preacher's count. I'm glad that the 100 and so of people have showed up tonight. You know, the 120 or so that we have here. But no, Luke wasn't like that at all. He was very specific, and he says an innumerable amount of people. There was crowds that followed Christ, folks. The message of Christ, the person of Christ, he drew crowds. And it's this particular crowd where we meet a man that has an issue with his brother. The focus is on the rich fool in the parable of the rich fool. But in the context, Jesus is talking about how a follower of Christ should trust God for his provisions. A follower of Christ should certainly be responsible, and we know that through lessons on stewardship and lessons that are related to that. But genuinely, a follower of Christ should allow themselves to be comforted by the fact that God will provide for them and to be not taken up with the cares of this world. That's the big picture. That's the big setting. That's the things that he was telling people when he would tell them about confessing him before men and those types of things. And we see that he teaches in this parable and around this parable that as Christians, we should not be worriers and worriers about the things of this earth. That's the big picture. Now, let's narrow this down to the smaller picture. In this crowd of people, in this crowd of many multitudes, in verse 13, we see a man that has a brother, and evidently there are some issues involved with inheritance. In the Jewish system of faith, the older brother got it all. they got it all. They got, well, I say all, they got more or less a 90% portion of the inheritance. The other children weren't left out to dry, but certainly the older brother, think of Jacob and Esau. Think about the inheritance issue of the Jewish lineage. In this system of faith that was, by the way, in place at the time, Christ lived under the law of Moses and under those heritages. He says to Jesus Christ, verse 13, then one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. I see two people here in this particular sentence that are greedy people. You have a brother that wants more than he should have, and obviously you have a brother that won't share with the younger brother. In our society today, the way things have changed a little bit, if you have siblings, I have five siblings, and if it were to come to pass that we needed to discuss the inheritance that we share, I'm certain, and a matter of fact, we've actually discussed this, I'm certain there'll be no conflict, very little at all, and whatever that there is will be divided up. And maybe you've had this situation where you've lost a mother or father, a grandmother or grandfather, and you start to talk with your siblings about who gets what and how we're going to do this. Most of the time, I ain't saying all the time, but most of the time, that's a dynamic that's done reasonably and evenly distributed. As a matter of fact, in state law, if I own property and I pass on, and Summer and I maybe pass on, my children have equal rights to that property. It's not like that in the Jewish system. It was the firstborn got the inheritance. And this man wanted Jesus to tell that firstborn, divide this inheritance with me. Well, to me, that sounds like a firstborn child or a secondborn child that wanted more than he should have gotten. He coveted. He wanted more. Now, it's implied, it doesn't say this, but it's implied that there was some greed on the older brother too. If he would have went to his older brother and they would have worked that out, he wouldn't have had to ask Jesus this. If I pass on to my demise, my 20 rod and reels are divided evenly. Bradley gets 10 and Tyler gets 10, all right? And that even distribution is our way of life. But it wasn't so here. And Jesus makes a remarkable comment. By the way, did Jesus know the heart of this man? You bet he did. You want to go to some scriptures that talk about how Jesus can look right through your eyes and see right into your heart? He can. I promise you he can. He's told many people, why do you this? Why do you murmur? Why do you think this? Why do you think that? And they were like, wait a minute, how did you know? What about the woman at the well? You've had 5 husbands, and the one you live with now is not your husband. Wait a minute. Come see a man that told me everything about my whole life. He would tell one in John chapter 1, beginning in about verse 40 or 42, when he called one of his disciples. He said, I saw you under the fig tree. You don't have any guile in your heart. And he's like, how do you know that? Jesus can see in your heart. He knows what you're thinking right now. And do you think that he knew what that man that wanted something that really didn't belong to him, do you think he knew his heart? I think that he did. And he responds by saying, basically, who made me the judge? He said to him, man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? He lived under the law of Moses. And Jesus fulfilled those things. He didn't violate law when he didn't have to. He healed on the Sabbath, but that's different. He told that man, I'm not the judge or arbitrator over that matter. And he spoke directly to that fellow. Look in verse 14. He said to him, who made me judge over this? And that's important because the very next verse, he takes a step back and he looks at the crowd. Remember that crowd? They were trampling each other. There's so many. It's innumerable. You can't count the people. And you know what he says to the crowd? He says, take heed and beware of covetousness. Now, if I'm the guy that just asked the question, I'm feeling about 2 feet high. Okay? I've asked Jesus a question, and Jesus has come over and he said, basically, and I'm not picking on Damon, I'm just using this as an illustration. He says, take heed and beware of covetousness. Don't be like this guy that wants something that's not his. Do you see what a profound effect that would have on a crowd? I don't think he would have intentionally embarrassed or made an example of the man. I think it was necessary, and he used it as a teaching moment. Beware of the covetousness. And he gives the reason why. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Oh, if we could just get that through our thick heads. One's life does not, it's not made by how much that you have. Your life does not consist of your things. I have a lot of stuff. I've moved 26 times in the past 2 years, and I feel like it anyway. We have a lot of stuff. We have about 70% of the stuff that we had when we were in Florida. We had about 70% stuff then. When we have a lot of stuff. I know some of y'all got a lot of stuff too. And too many times we get so concerned with how much stuff we can have or the quality of our stuff or the newness of our stuff. Our lives don't consist of the things that we have. Beware covetousness. Beware covetousness. Your life's not made up of that. And he takes this message, he takes this example, he takes this opportunity, and guess how Jesus taught? He taught directly to the people. When he told them, beware. He talked directly to the woman at the well. He talked directly to Nicodemus. But when he had a crowd present, when he had mixed company, when he had mixed intelligence, when he had mixed wealthy and poor, when he had mixed people, typically he taught in parables. Parabole in the Greek, to lay down beside, to show like, okay? And when you're a builder or when you're a technician or when you're somebody who's in building something, sometimes you need to have your plan. You need to have, what am I doing here? I need to make it just like this. That's the idea of parable, a teaching method that shows you in picture word form of what this is like. And he talks about a man that we'll call a rich fool. He calls him the rich fool. And he said to them, verse 15, drop down to verse 16. He spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentiful. I'm going to read through the parable and come back. I'll read through verse 21. And he thought within himself, saying, what do I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and then they will store all my crops. And there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Wow. That parable, that short few verses in your Bible speak so many. You could do 5 gospel meeting series on that one parable. Because, folks, greed leads to covetousness. Covetousness leads to laying up treasures for yourself and neglecting the treasure of God. In verse 16, which I think is the most important verse in this parable, he says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentiful. What yielded plentiful? Did the rich man yield plentiful? No. The ground of a certain rich man. Let me ask you a question. Who made the ground? Who causes the corn to grow? Who causes the wheat to grow? Who causes, I don't know if there's any gardeners, and I'm not a gardener. I'm never going to be a gardener, okay? I'm just going to tell you, all right? I don't particularly care for it, and I get frustrated with it. We've tried it a couple times, and you know what? I know when I'm licked, all right? I'm just not a gardener. The ground of a certain Tom Bowling never produced anything, all right? But if it did, I was wise enough to understand who caused that growth. God caused the growth. He causes the flowers to bloom. He has his little finger on every drop of rain that falls on the ground. He has his finger on every molecule and every plant the ground of a certain rich man produced. And that rich man did not give God the credit for the things that were coming to him. Folks, when we have a good day or have a good week, and I'm talking financially, when we have a good year financially, when we're doing okay financially, we need to understand it's not us. It's not something we're doing. The Lord is blessing us. The Lord is providing for us. And he says that the ground of the rich man yielded plentifully. And there are certain things that rich man could have done with his plenty. He could have fed the poor. He could have donated there's certainly people around that were hungry. Jesus had to feed 5,000 of them. There were certainly many things that he could have done with that plenty. But what did he want to do? He wanted to save it up for himself. He wanted to hold on to it. I can retire earlier now. I can put that. Listen, and I want you to don't take this away from this lesson tonight. I don't think there's anything sinful or wrong about planning for retirement. I don't think there's anything sinful or wrong about budgeting your money properly where you can live comfortably. I don't think there's anything sinful or wrong about being wealthy. Some of the most faithful Christians that I know are multimillionaires, okay? There's no sin inherently in wealth. But if you're a person who doesn't give God the credit for your increase, and your concern is how am I going to hoard this money to make it last and take my ease, right? Eat, drink, and be merry. He didn't want to have to do anything anymore. Well, that's a problem, folks. You seen this commercial on TV? This guy's got gold. He buys it. He buys gold and silver. I buy my gold at XYZ Capital, whatever it is. I can put it in this little safe. We'll give you the safe if you buy so much of it. You seen this commercial? He wants you to buy this gold, buy this gold. Now, like I say, there's nothing wrong with having gold. I have silver. I have 2 little pieces or 3 little pieces of it. It's worth about $40. There's nothing wrong with that. But this man was tearing down barns and building bigger barns. He was buying bigger safes, if you will, to store his gold and neglecting the things that needed to be done with it. In verse 19 we see, and I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods. Wow. You have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease. Eat, drink, and be merry. You know, there's a sermon title that's been used. I haven't used it, but there's a sermon title that's been used for the parable of the rich fool. It's called Eye Problems. Eye Problems. In verses 17, 18, and 19, and he thought within himself, that's a personal pronoun, what shall I do since I have no room for my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will pull down barns and gather, and I will store my crops and my goods, and I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. It's 13 times in 3 verses he refers to himself. 13 times in 3 verses he refers to himself. You think he's got a problem? When we have a windfall, as I call it, is your first order of thought, how can I help a poor person? I ain't stand here saying that's always been my first thought. I like to give back to the church. I like to help others when I can. I certainly pray that I never come to a point So all I'm thinking about is bigger barns. And I want to close out in the last couple verses here with the danger that's involved in selfishness and being foolish. But God said, look who said this to him. God said to him, Jesus is God. He died on the cross because he claimed to be God. Jesus is God. He came to this earth in the flesh, and he lived and died on a cross. He is the Word. He is God. God said to this man, fool. I've been called a lot of names in my life. Name calling it hurts. But in the Bible, to be called a fool is the second worst possible word that you can be called. Infidel would be the worst, I think. Unbeliever. You fool, he says. You are an absolute fool. If somebody come up to you and said, you know what, you're just an absolute fool, that's insulting, isn't it? As a matter of fact, the Scriptures tell us don't do that. Don't call people that. It's that bad. It's that harsh. It's that difficult for this man. You fool. And you know why he's a fool? This night, your soul will be required. Your soul. Oftentimes we don't think about that because it's morbid. It's scary. It's, you're preaching hellfire and brimstone, Tom. We don't think about that. We might not make it home tonight, folks. This night, he says, your soul will be required, and then what? All this stuff is going to burn up. Don't matter how much stuff I like to live, and I like to live comfortably. Nothing against wealth and prosperity. But your heart better be right, because this very night, your soul may be required of you. And then he says, then whose will those things be which you have, you notice what he did there? Which you have provided. He reminds him of how he thinks he provided all that when God provided it. Your soul's going to be required of you. Then what are people going to do with all these barn loads of grain? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Like I said, many sermons can be preached. Maybe it is that you've heard many from this passage. But what I see is a loving, faithful Christ that takes opportunity in a crowd of people to give a message about what's important in life. And folks, your checkbook is not important. I'm just as saved as you are, and I promise you I'm 10 times poorer. I'm just using that for an example. Maybe it is your 10 times poorer. I don't know. It don't matter, is what I'm saying. The poorest of the poor will inherit the kingdom. The richest of the rich could inherit the kingdom. None of that stuff matters. What matters is that you have the mind set to do good with the things that you have. So is he who lays up treasure for himself. How are you laying up your treasure? I see a Christ that took a teaching moment. And yeah, maybe at the expense of some poor dude in the audience that asked a question that needed to be rebuked. He took that lesson and he taught the crowd in a way that was very effective. Do you think they would have known about barns and storage and agriculture? Well, certainly they would. How do you think they felt when he said, none of this matters? How do you feel tonight when the preacher stands up before you and says, you know what? None of this stuff matters. It certainly doesn't matter to Christ. I'll just prove that through the Bible. How is your attitude toward the things that you have? The attitude toward the things God has blessed you with. God has blessed every one of us in this room. We have homes, we have cars, we have food, we have healthy children, we have loving family. He's blessed us. It all comes from Him. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, if you're not faithful in your stewardship, if you've had something that's just clicked in your head and I need the prayers of the church. It could be that you have sin in your life. Folks, the blackness and darkness of sin is a horrible thing. And the blood of Christ cleanses it like wool. Be brand new. If you're not a member of the church and want to repent of your sins and confess His name and be buried with Christ in baptism, we can do that. And you'll rise to walk in newness of life. I'm just going to tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy. As a matter of fact, we have volumes and volumes and volumes of Christ's own and the apostles' own teaching trying to help us through the way because God knew that it wouldn't be easy. Maybe you are saved, but you need the prayers of the church for strength. We're going to stand and we're going to sing. If you have a need, be coming up forward as Brother John leads us.
On behalf of the Lawnville Road Church of Christ, I want to thank you for joining us today for our worship. If you ever have an opportunity, we invite you to join us at our physical location at 1301 Lawnville Road in Kingston, Tennessee. We hope you will come experience the simplicity of New Testament Christianity, learn about God, and become a part of His family. If you have questions, if you would like to know more about the Bible, or if you would like a home Bible study, feel free to contact us by calling 865-717-0444. Or, for more information, visit our website, www.lawnvilleroadcoc.org. Again, we thank you, and we hope you have a blessed day.